Now, within the government space, you find that it's difficult to attract most of the IT skills because one will end up being labeled as a director or as a chief director and so forth.
I thought that's a nice title to have.
Sometimes the tech is what is important is for them to be remunerated accordingly, according to the value that they bring into the organization.
Hello and welcome to ITWeb on the Road with me, Sibahle Malinga. Today I'm here at the Governance, Risk and Compliance Summit in Bryanston, Johannesburg, where ITWeb is hosting this huge conference where a lot of ICT experts and industry pundits are shedding light on the importance of governance, risk and compliance, and also looking at trends that are dominating South Africa's landscape. Well, today I'm sitting with one of those industry insiders, and his name is Mr. Jabulani Hugh Hlatshwayo. He's the Deputy Director General or CIO at the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. He is going to be talking to us about his insightful presentation just a few minutes ago that really captured the audience, where he was talking about the importance of managing risks associated with third-party vendors or suppliers. Mr. Hlatshwayo, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, especially because it was so authentic. You gave interesting case studies of what was happening within the Department of Justice. You know, you spoke about incidents that have happened a few years ago and how you were able to mitigate them. But perhaps a great place for us to start is just touching on your theme for today's presentation, which was managing risks associated with third-party vendors and suppliers, which is a critical component of an effective risk management strategy. So let's talk about why this is important and just give us a few examples.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity. So, governance and risk within the IT space are very important, especially when it comes to managing your third-party IT service providers, your vendors and suppliers. In my case, this is extremely important on the basis that we depend so much on these vendors because government in general, we are not fully we have serious capacitation challenges in terms of IT skilled resources, and therefore it means we have to supplement the resource capacity that we have through the usage of the third-party service providers. So obviously, they are an extension of your resource capacity and capability within the organization. Therefore, you have to have a controlled, a proper structured way of managing these third-party service providers such that your information within your department, within your organization is not compromised, is always secured, and there's controlled access to that information. So my presentation was really focusing on that. Of course, in order to manage that, you have to consider the possible risks emanating from managing your environment with the usage of service providers who are assisting your employees.
So you talk of those possible risks. Perhaps let's touch on typical examples of what these risks are, what the causes are, and several ways of mitigating them.
Yeah, I think the one on top of the list is a cybersecurity risk. The data breach risks. Which is also associated with cybersecurity. Also, your performance risks. On the basis that they might not have the passion that you have in terms of fully understanding your need to provide an excellent service to your customers, and therefore it depends the types of clients that they use to support it, So in most of the instances, especially the cybersecurity risk, because some of these service providers, because of their skills, they have access to your back office, and therefore some of them, they even have admin, rise, because you find that like you have your network administrators, your Linux administration, who will manage your server environment. And therefore, you really, really, really have to ensure that you security vet the resources that are brought about by those service providers, so that you know that you're dealing with trustworthy people, honest people, and you have to find ways of ensuring that their access to your system is fully controlled all the time, and monitoring them and reviewing them all the time, so it's quite challenging. However, if you have the right governance structures within your environment, and actually make sure that they understand your governance structures, your governance processes, your controls, then at least you will be safe. Like for instance, techies sometimes they've got a tendency to introduce changes in your environment because they like solution oriented. So you have to ensure that you have the right change management committees that are quite effective, that will ensure that any change that is introduced to your environment is actually properly assessed in terms of the risk that it might bring to your environment, and whatever solutions that are being introduced, the architecture in terms of the compliance to the entire enterprise architecture of the organization, so that, it doesn't affect other solutions that you are using to provide you with the services.
So one incident that you mentioned during your presentation is, how the Department of Justice actually had a fraud incident. I think it was from an insider who had access, who illegally accessed your payment systems. Just tell us about how you're able to deal with that and also just mitigate that issue.
Yeah. So without really revealing too much about that incident, but what it meant in order for us to manage that incident, because you're talking about systems, financial systems sometimes, that we use to assist our public. We had to close down the system. We had to suspend the usage of the system. We had to fully review the access to the system from the front end and the back end side. We had to ensure that all the users of the system are actually authorized users of the system. So sort of re-registering all the users. We had to introduce security mechanisms such as multi-factor authentication, so that users cannot claim to having their user credentials being, abused. Somebody saying, yes, as much as the audit trail is showing you that my user credentials were used, but it wasn't me. So the multi-factor authentication had to be sort of an initiative that is compulsory for everybody. And also on the back end side, our system administrators, gone are the days whereby, you have maybe two system administrators sharing the same password or having the same access to the same part of the environment and so forth. We also had to ensure that we do separation of duties within from the front end side and the back end side, and also ensuring that we implement audit trail, comprehensive audit trail. From the front end side, the users who access the system through the solution itself, and from the back end side, implemented triggers in terms of the database, where the actual information is contained, mapped some of the fields as sensitive, so that we can always be proactive and know that, important fields such as changing of the users' account numbers and so forth cannot just be changed by anybody, locking some of those fields. And and of course we reinforced even our VPN, that enables users to be able to still use the system without necessarily being in the office, so it's a number of initiatives that we've really introduced. And then we had to start rolling back the users, bit by bit, incrementally, and ensuring that whoever is re-enrolled on the system actually uses all the controls that we've introduced. Yeah.
So you also touched on a very important topic, which was the skills shortage. That's an issue that really affects all organizations nationwide as well as globally. And of course, government often contends with that challenge of a shortage of IT skills. Let's talk about what these skills are, just in general, that you specifically spoke about. And on why it is that oftentimes IT specialists and IT experts find the private sector more attractive than the public sector.
Yeah. Firstly, the government sector, unfortunately, it's got a specific structure, which is mainly based on the different levels that talk to deputy director, chief director, and so forth. It's not really accommodative of IT expertise or IT skills or specialists that are required in the IT sector. Unlike in other organizations whereby you can have different levels, of positions. However, some of the levels will be like focusing on specialization. So there would be for specific expertise, so you'd be defined as a specialist, maybe at same as management level, but still a specialist. Actually, in some of the organizations, some of the specialists, they go at executive level. They would be labeled as SSEs or something like that. Now, within the government space, you find that it's difficult to attract most of the IT skills because one will end up being labeled as a director or as a chief director and so forth.
I thought that's a nice title to have.
Sometimes the tech is what is important is for them to be remunerated accordingly, according to the value that they bring into the organization. So you find that within the government space, you find that maybe a director cannot be remunerated at the specific level. It's quite normal in the private sector, for instance, to find a manager of a specific function or a department, earning less than a specialist.
Wow.
Because that specialist, the value that he brings to the company. But now in the government sector, you'll never find that. If I'm a chief director, you'll never attract an IT specialist, for instance, who's supposed to earn more than 1.8 million. It happens, I remember at some point in time, one of a guy who's working for SARS, at least SARS is not really constrained by such, but I was not at the justice at that time. They had a mainframe environment that they were supporting, and there was a specialist of the mainframe whom they were employing. And he was telling me that this specialist, we're paying him 2 million per annum, because that's the market rate. That's how scarce they were, So now I'm not saying specialists should be earning that much, but you find that with the salary structure within the government space, you cannot attract IT specialists because they require to be remunerated at the market rate, and because number one, you cannot actually compare. For instance, you'd have your senior IT solutions architects, your senior database administrators, you have your server and Linux specialists, your cybersecurity experts, and so forth. They command quite a decent salary in the market. However, the challenges that the government sector has got. It's nearly impossible to match some of the market rates that are out there. So we can only attract mainly, junior IT specialists, and you find that most of the time when they actually get more developed, they actually leave, the departments. So it's something that has got to be reviewed from the DPSA side, because it makes us to be more reliant on the IT service providers who would actually bring those specialists into our environment. However, because IT expertise also, there's so much in demand, you find that even those expertise, those resources don't usually last in your environment, because they also leave those organizations or choose to work with other clients where there's more challenging technology and so forth.
And we do know, of course, that IT service providers do come at a cost. And as government, you do have limited financial resources.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that? I mean, and also what becomes the broader impact then if your other option is to have junior trained IT specialists or you then have to rely on service providers who don't come cheap.
No, it's a very difficult one. We have to strike a balance, because remember, if you bring a service provider into your environment, you don't want them providing you a service that cannot be critically or objectively assessed because of total lack of that skills understanding or that expertise understanding. So we do have an option of bringing consultants, but they also come in at a huge rate, So what you find ourselves doing, as whether at exec level or senior management level, I actually have to fold my sleeves myself, and actually use my experience because I started as a techie myself, as a developer, so a programmer and a systems analyst. At least I've got experience also in database administration. You end up having to actually supervise or quality assure the work that is delivered because some of your internal staff themselves, they cannot quality assure whatever, So at the end of the day, you end up stretching yourself, not just being a manager or a DDG, but also putting your IT caps and, and even suggesting in some of the instances, some of the solutions that might be used.
Wow, and getting your hands dirty
At your hand,
like you did in your junior days. There's no harm in that.
No, there's no harm in that per se, but you have to strike a balance. Sometimes you don't have enough time to do that, and sometimes that can be viewed as micromanagement. Do you understand?
Yes.
So
your team also learns a lot from you. Sure, yeah.
We try to learn from each other. However, the DG is also giving me support, in terms of, the types of expertise, in terms of the service providers that we need in our environment. Unfortunately, IT services, they are quite costly, and you cannot avoid that because most of these services, they emanate internationally, overseas. You talk about Microsoft, somewhere in Ireland, in the US, their structures are based on, dollar ratings and so forth, especially software and so forth. That's why you find that most of the IT skills, actually, it's not a problem within just the government space. I think even the private sector, is now struggling with the right IT skills. I think one of the ladies in the panel even commented that they actually sourcing some of the IT skills, internationally, I think NetBank or something like that. So it's quite a challenging environment, and it's quite a competitive environment because the opportunities for IT expertise are very much, they're quite wide globally, and you find most of these skills now migrating to other countries. So we have to pull up our socks in terms of reskilling our population. More programs should be put in place in terms of IT skilling. I think we have to be intentional about it from the junior level. We need. There has to be a paradigm shift. Gone are those days whereby I think you say no, my kid doesn't have a mathematical mind and all that. We need to start building our skills from grassroots level, primary, and creating more tech colleges, tech universities, and channeling more of our kids to do IT-related training.
In closing, Mr. Hlatshwayo, just back to your topic, what would you say is the best approach to, mitigating risks and also just safeguarding company systems that goes beyond the basics of firewall implementation, that goes beyond the fundamentals of backup and recovery is, particularly in instances where there are high risks?
Yeah. No, you have to do proper due diligence because at the end of the day, you're dealing with people here. The security vetting. You have to properly assess the resources that are allocated to your environment. You have to educate them to understand that within the government space, governance and risk management and proper controls for our processes, internal processes, is quite key, So in that way, you have to ensure that they comply to all your governance processes. They don't just do things because they are used to doing them. Proper access control, the policies, they need to understand your cybersecurity policies, your cybersecurity procedures. So it's not just a matter of them thinking that because they comply to whatever processes their organization is demanding of them. So they have to think of themselves as an extension of government officials and want to be associated with providing excellent services for the government.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. There was quite an insightful conversation. Unfortunately, time is no longer on our side. It's been really interesting. And that was, of course, Jabulani Hugh, who is the Deputy Director General, or CIO, at the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, talking to us about all issues relating to governance, risk, and compliance, focusing on managing risks associated with third-party vendors and suppliers. That has been another edition of ITWeb on the Road with me, Sibashe Malinga. Till we meet again, adios.